Welcome, Jeff Blumenfeld, and put your hands together.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We're kind of a small, intimate group here, so I thought I'd talk from down here. So I have a company in Southern Connecticut that works for corporate sponsors and links corporate sponsors who want to demonstrate product performance in dire conditions, that links corporate sponsors with explorers and adventurers. So I want to thank Loa, which makes these boots, Loa boots. I want to thank them for sponsoring this book tour. So sponsorships. When did this all start? Well, I'm not sure exactly when it did start, but how about 1492? Columbus sails the ocean blue because he got sponsored. How did he get sponsored? He goes to Queen Isabella. How many times? At least 3 times, promising her great riches if she would pay for him to discover the New World. So Columbus goes out and discovers the New World, and I don't know, he may not have been first, but he had a great publicist. Columbus, Ohio, Columbus Circle, everything's named after this guy. We move forward to this guy, Will Steger, arguably the most experienced polar explorer alive. And Will sent me a letter in 1985 saying he wanted to go to the North Pole by dog sled. I want to go to the North Pole to prove that Peary could have done it in 1909. Because it turns out that before Will Steger came along in 1986 with his North Pole expedition, there had never been a confirmed dog sled expedition to the North Pole. Think about it, the controversy between Cook and Peary. Who got there first? Well, likely they both got pretty close to the North Pole, and history is on the side of Peary. But there's still a Cook Society that holds the torch for Frederick Cook to say that Cook probably beat Peary. Well, regardless of who beat who, in 1909, Will Steger did the first confirmed dog sled expedition to the North Pole. He kept hammering away. I was representing the DuPont company. No emails back then in '85. He sent proposal after proposal. And finally he said, okay, just to prove I know what I'm doing, he said, I'm going to go by dog sled from Duluth, Minnesota to Point Barrow, Alaska. And he does it. He does a 5,000-mile solo dog sled expedition, and it got our attention. And rule number 1 in looking for sponsorship is the sponsor wants to know, who are you? What have you done before? Sponsors want to know you've got the goods. And Will Steger demonstrated to us that he had the goods in 1985 to go to Point Barrow, Alaska, 1986 to go to the North Pole, and I'll talk about his expedition in a bit. One of my favorite expedition stories is the story of this gentleman. He calls me on the phone. Now, I talk a lot about the so what rule. So you want to climb Everest. Time out. I think it's been climbed. Oh, but I'm the first Canadian woman. Well, that's interesting. Oh, I've got 1 leg. Well, that's interesting. Or, oh, I happen to be blind. That's very interesting. So that answers the so what question. So he calls me up. He knew I was representing Duofold, the underwear, thermal underwear people. And he says he wants to climb a mountain in Antarctica. And I'm like going, you want to go where? This is, I got the title of the book. You want to go where? Wants to climb a mountain in Antarctica. I say to him, is it the tallest mountain in Antarctica? He goes, no, it's only 10,000 feet. And I said, well, how old are you? And he goes, well, I'm 88. And I'm thinking to myself, how is this guy ever going to get sponsorship? And then he says to me, he wants to climb a mountain in Antarctica, and it's named after himself. It's named after, and I'm like going, how does that happen? How do you get a mountain named after yourself? He's the last surviving member of Admiral Byrd's expedition. His name is Colonel Norman D. Vaughan, a great American hero, a World War II hero, and I did a competitor 13 times. He's on the phone with me looking for sponsorship from the DuPont company, and he wants to climb a mountain in Antarctica named after himself. That's like ba-dum-bum. And so over the course of a few years, Norman Vaughan, as he looks today, in front of what he considered his mountain, it had never been summited before. Well, because there are a lot of mountains in Antarctica. This is just 10,000 feet. We get him a little bit of sponsorship. We took him to New York at the Explorers Club. He did a press conference at the Explorers Club, and he's hot to conquer the Antarctic. And he went to the Antarctica. Here he is looking at his mountain. He got sponsorship from Federal Express, Prodigy, and Eagle. Here he is looking for the first time at Mount Vaughan. And here's Norman Vaughan being top roped up a 10,000-foot mountain named after himself. What a great story. And this had been picked up on National Geographic. They did PBS specials on him. I was very proud to be part of this. When he gets to the top, he lit 88 birthday candles to celebrate his birthday. I encourage you to write down normanvaughan.com, learn more about him. This is Paul Shirky. Paul Shirky comes from Ely, Minnesota, an incredibly experienced sled dog driver. He owns a school called Wintergreen. He takes people on polar trips, polar expeditions. Paul wanted to answer the so what question. He had a great concept in 1989. It turns out that before the ice curtain came slamming down in the Bering Strait, prohibiting travel between the Soviet Far East and Alaska, 1947, you could not travel between these two countries for years and years until about 1989. So Paul Shirky decides that he wants to have a ceremony and a sled dog expedition from Anadyr through the coast of the Soviet Far East, across the Bering Strait, between Little Diomede and Big Diomede. So Paul decides to have this expedition, and we help him get some sponsorship from the DuPont company, which makes this product called Thermax in thermal underwear. And that's called the halo effect. Companies send their products out on expeditions. They send their products out in dire conditions, and it says a lot about a product. If the product works on Mount Everest, it's probably going to work when you go to Costco. Well, they do that because it says a lot about the gear. So we wanted to give him Thermax as Dmitry Sparrow and Paul Shirky began their expedition. And here's the shot in Anadyr. If you ever want to get sponsorship, you've got to give credit to those. It's not a gift. It's a business relationship from your sponsor. So we talked about Christopher Columbus. And we talked about Christopher Columbus coming to the New World in 1492. Well, I work with a bunch of people that think he was 500 years too late. 500 years too late to the guy that built this ship. Gunnar Marel is a sea captain in Iceland, a direct descendant of Leif Erikson. He built this Viking replica ship almost by hand and had a dream. And his dream, the trip of his lifetime, was to sail from Iceland all the way to the New World, to Newfoundland, where there is a Viking settlement, and then down the east coast. Of course, as we know, the Columbus story, Vikings were already here giving Columbus some guidance on this. Very, very exciting moment when they arrived in New York City. Very exciting moment there when the Channel 2 reporter, we had a weather helicopter overhead, and he's actually doing his report live from the Viking ship in New York City. Now, when you do an expedition or an adventure, you've got to think visually. Because remember, the duty of an explorer or an adventurer is to go off, do a trip, do it safely, but tell the rest of us what it was like, the rest of us who didn't get to go. And that's where skills in photography and blogging and Facebook, that all comes in handy. And particularly in photography. We looked in this business for a signature photo. United Nations, Viking ship in New York, and media coverage. That's the kind of picture. But I wanted just a little bit more than this. You can't really see it here, but we had a fireboat welcome in New York. Very exciting moment, another signature photo as the Viking ship sailed into New York. The Viking captain, Gunnar Marel, deep in debt, struggled for sponsorship. He finally got sponsorship from the most likely source of money for him, which would be the country of Iceland. Do it for publicity, do it for exposure. He did the trip, did it safely, sailed across to the New World. They shipped the boat back, and a group of people in a small town near Reykjavik built a multi-million-dollar museum, a Viking museum, where it's on display to this day. If you fly to Iceland, you can see this Viking museum.